Under the wide sky of the countryside, Ethan rode his horse back toward his ranch. He was a cowboy who lived a simple life, working from dawn to dusk, fixing fences, tending to cattle, and keeping his land in order. Most people in town knew him as quiet and hard-working. He did not speak more than needed, but when he did, his words carried weight. Ethan's life was steady, calm, and lonely. Since his parents had passed away years ago, he had no family, and his days blended into each other, filled only with work and the company of his horse and cattle. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon and the sky turned shades of red and gold, Ethan noticed something unusual near the old oak tree by the fence line. At first, he thought it was a bundle of cloth left behind by passing travelers. But as he rode closer, he saw movement. He stopped his horse and stepped down carefully, his boots sinking into the dry earth. There, lying on the ground, was a woman. She was dressed in clothes that looked too fine for the dusty trails. Her face was covered with a light cloth veil, and her body seemed weak. Ethan bent down and gently asked if she was all right. Her voice was faint, barely above a whisper, but it held urgency. "Please, don't take the cloth off." Her words struck him with surprise. He was not trying to touch her veil, but her plea revealed how much fear she carried in her heart. He could see she was injured. There was a scrape on her arm, and her ankle looked swollen. Her clothes, though once elegant, were torn from travel. Ethan did not know who she was or where she had come from, but he could not leave her there. He offered his hand, and though she hesitated, she finally allowed him to help her up. He placed her carefully on his horse and led them back toward his ranch cabin. The ride was slow, the silence broken only by the sound of the horse's hooves against the dirt. Ethan glanced at her from time to time. She sat straight but kept her face turned away. Even in her weakened state, she held herself with dignity. Something about her stirred curiosity in Ethan's heart. When they arrived at his cabin, Ethan helped her down. He noticed she winced as her foot touched the ground, confirming his suspicion that her ankle was injured. Inside, the cabin was simple: a wooden table, a few chairs, a small fireplace, and a single bed in the corner. Ethan placed a chair near the fire and guided her to sit. He fetched water from a jug and gave it to her. She accepted it quietly, her hands trembling as she drank. "Do you have a name?" Ethan asked softly. She hesitated, then answered, "Clara." Ethan nodded. He respected her silence about other things. He could see in her eyes that she had gone through something heavy, something she was not ready to share. He brought her a clean cloth and wrapped her injured ankle. As he worked, she kept her veil tightly in place. When his hand brushed near it by accident, she flinched and whispered again, "Please, don't take the cloth off." Ethan paused, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with both fear and a silent plea for understanding. "All right," he said calmly. "I won't." That night, Ethan gave her his bed while he sat in the chair by the fireplace. The storm outside grew stronger, the wind howling through the cracks of the cabin walls. Ethan stayed awake for a long time, listening to the storm and thinking about the stranger in his care. He wondered what kind of trouble had brought her here. The townsfolk would surely ask questions if they found out. But for now, it was just him, Clara, and the sound of rain against the roof. In the morning, Ethan rose early, as he always did. He cooked a simple breakfast: eggs and bread. Clara ate slowly, thanking him in a quiet voice. She still avoided removing the veil, even though it made eating awkward. Ethan did not comment on it. He respected her choice. During the day, Ethan went about his chores. Clara, though still weak, offered to help. She insisted on sweeping the cabin floor and even helped prepare supper. Her hands were skilled, as though she had been taught carefully once upon a time. Ethan noticed that despite her fragile appearance, she had strength in her movements and patience in her work. As the days passed, Clara stayed on the ranch. She rarely spoke of herself, and Ethan did not push her to. He was curious, but he believed trust had to be earned slowly. What puzzled him most was her fear of the cloth. It was not vanity, he thought it was something deeper. Whenever her hand touched the veil, it was with a kind of desperation, as though it was the one thing keeping her safe. One evening, while they sat near the fire, Clara told him softly, "I know people will ask questions. Please, if anyone comes, don't let them see me." Ethan studied her. He saw in her eyes both sorrow and courage. He had no idea what she was running from, but he gave her a firm nod. "You're safe here," he said. And so began the strange companionship between the cowboy and the veiled woman. She had entered his life without warning, carrying secrets hidden beneath cloth and silence. He had taken her in without knowing why. Yet, in the quiet moments they shared on the ranch, an unspoken bond began to form. Ethan felt it every time her voice softened when she spoke his name, and Clara felt it in the way he never pressed her to reveal what she was not ready to share. Still, in the back of Ethan's mind, questions lingered. Who was she? What had happened to her? And why did the thought of removing that cloth bring such terror to her soul? He did not know the answers, but he knew one thing for certain: his life was no longer the same. The cowboy who had once lived in silence now found himself waiting for each word, each glance, from the woman whose secret was hidden behind the veil. The days slowly turned into a week, and life on the ranch began to change in small but noticeable ways. Ethan had always been a man of routine. He rose before sunrise, fed the cattle, checked the fences, and worked the land until the sun went down. His meals were usually simple, eaten alone, and his evenings were spent in silence. But now, there was someone else inside his cabin, someone who moved gently, spoke softly, and carried with her a sense of mystery that lingered in every corner. Clara, though still weak from her injuries, insisted on helping whenever she could. On the second morning after her arrival, Ethan stepped outside to fetch water, and when he returned, he found her carefully sweeping the wooden floor with a small broom. The veil was still over her face, but her posture was graceful, and she worked with determination. Ethan watched for a moment, leaning against the doorway, and something unfamiliar stirred in him, a quiet warmth that had been missing from his life for years. "You don't have to do that," he said, setting the water jug on the table. Clara paused but did not look up. "I want to," she replied gently. "I cannot sit and do nothing while you work all day. I must earn my place here, even if only in small ways." Ethan didn't argue further. He knew she was stubborn, though in a gentle way, and he respected that. As long as she did not strain her ankle too much, he allowed her to continue. Each day, she grew a little stronger. She learned to walk around the cabin without leaning on the table for support. She prepared simple meals, her hands moving with skill as she chopped vegetables or kneaded dough. Ethan, who had never thought much about food beyond filling his stomach, began to notice the difference. Clara's meals had flavor, warmth, and care. But despite the comfort of her presence, there was always the veil. She never removed it, not even when they ate together. She would lift it just slightly, enough to take a bite, always making sure her face remained hidden. At first, Ethan tried to ignore it, but as the days went on, his curiosity deepened. It was not vanity, he realized. There was real fear behind her actions. Her eyes told the story. Each time he looked too long, she lowered her gaze, as if afraid he might ask what she could not answer. One afternoon, as they sat outside, Ethan repairing a saddle and Clara shelling beans, he finally asked, "Why do you hide yourself so much from the world?" Her hands froze for a moment. Then, in a voice soft but steady, she answered, "Because the world is not kind to what it does not understand." She did not say more, and Ethan did not push her. He only nodded, though her words stayed in his mind long after. As the days went by, whispers began to reach the ranch. Ethan rarely visited town, but when he did, he noticed people staring at him with curiosity. At the general store, a man mentioned seeing a shadowy figure near Ethan's land. Another time, the blacksmith asked if Ethan had taken in a guest. Though no one accused him directly, the air was thick with gossip. One evening, Ethan told Clara about it. She sat by the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "They will wonder," she said quietly. "They will always wonder. But please, I beg you, do not let them see me." Her voice trembled, and Ethan saw the same fear in her eyes that he had seen the first night. "You're safe here," Ethan assured her, his voice firm. "This is my land, my home. No one will force you out." Clara looked at him with gratitude. For the first time, her eyes softened, and he saw a hint of trust in them. It was a moment that made Ethan's chest tighten, though he didn't fully understand why. Despite the growing bond between them, the mystery of Clara deepened. Ethan often caught her staring out the window at night, as if expecting someone to appear. Sometimes, she would murmur words in her sleep, fragments of sentences, pieces of sorrow. Ethan once heard her whisper, the fire," followed by a cry that made him sit up in alarm. When he tried to wake her, she clutched the veil even in her sleep, as though afraid it might be taken from her. Ethan began to wonder what kind of life Clara had before she arrived here. Her clothes were fine, even though they were torn now. Her manners were careful, refined, unlike the rough simplicity of most women in town. She did not seem like someone used to hard labor, yet she adapted quickly, as though determined to prove herself. Whoever she was not ordinary. One late afternoon, Ethan took her outside to the corral. He wanted her to get fresh air and watch the horses. Clara stood by the fence, her hands resting on the wood. She smiled faintly as the horses galloped, their manes flying in the wind. Ethan noticed how the sunlight caught the edges of her veil, giving her a quiet, mysterious beauty. "You love horses," Ethan said, watching her eyes follow the animals. "Yes," Clara whispered. "When I was a child, I used to ride. It was the only time I felt free." Her voice carried a sadness that made Ethan look at her more closely. He wanted to ask who had taken that freedom away from her, but the words stayed unspoken. He knew she was not ready to share, and perhaps he was not ready to hear. As the sun set, Ethan felt something stir inside him. For years, he had lived only for work, his heart untouched by anything deeper. But now, watching Clara stand quietly by the fence, her secrets hidden yet her spirit shining through, he realized his life was no longer the same. The ranch that once echoed with silence now carried her presence in every corner. The meals they shared, the quiet evenings by the fire, the soft sound of her voice, it all wove itself into Ethan's world like threads in a blanket. He did not know how long she would stay, but he could not imagine the cabin without her anymore. Yet, even as warmth grew between them, the veil remained. And with it came the constant reminder that Clara carried something she was not ready to reveal. Ethan respected her choice, but deep inside, he wondered how long she could keep her secret hidden from him and from the world that was already starting to whisper about the cowboy and the veiled woman. The storm came on a night when the sky had turned dark too quickly, as if the heavens were warning of trouble. Ethan had just finished putting the horses into the barn when the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. By the time he stepped back inside the cabin, the wind was already howling and thunder rolled across the hills. Clara was sitting by the fire, her hands clasped together tightly, her eyes darting toward the window as if the storm itself frightened her. "You'll be safe here," Ethan said, shaking the water from his hat. "This cabin has stood through worse storms." But Clara did not answer. She seemed distant, her shoulders trembling slightly. Ethan set his hat down and crouched by her side. "Are you all right?" he asked. Before she could reply, a flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a crack of thunder that made the cabin shake. Clara let out a cry and clutched her veil tightly, as if it might fall. Her face turned pale, and sweat glistened on her forehead. Ethan realized she was not only afraid of the storm, something else was happening. Within minutes, her body grew weak. She began to shiver, and her breathing came in short, uneven gasps. Ethan quickly fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her, but the fever had already taken hold. She murmured in a broken voice, words that sent a chill down his spine. "They're coming, the fire, don't let them find me." Ethan froze. These were not the words of someone dreaming peacefully. They were fragments of fear, spoken from a memory too real to be imagined. He tried to calm her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth. "You're safe," he whispered again and again, though he could tell she did not hear him. For hours, Clara drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Sometimes she called out names Ethan did not recognize. Other times, she begged in a trembling voice, "Please, don't take the cloth off." Her hand never left her veil, even when she was half conscious. It was as though her very life depended on keeping it in place. Ethan sat beside her the entire night. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, the real battle was with Clara's fever and the secrets she carried. He kept the fire burning, prayed silently, and did everything he could to ease her pain. Yet one thought kept pressing into his mind: what was she hiding that filled her with such terror? By morning, the storm passed. The sky was pale and quiet again, but Clara's fever left her weak and trembling. Ethan stepped outside briefly to fetch more water, and as he did, he saw a figure riding toward the ranch. It was the sheriff. Sheriff Dalton was a broad man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He rode up slowly, nodding at Ethan. "Morning," he said, though his tone was serious. "I need to speak with you." Ethan felt a weight in his chest. He knew what this visit meant. The whispers in town had reached the sheriff. "What's the matter?" Ethan asked. The sheriff adjusted his hat. "A young woman's gone missing. Clara Whitmore, the daughter of Samuel Whitmore, the richest rancher in this county. Folks say she disappeared weeks ago. Her father's been offering a reward for anyone who can bring her back. Rumor has it she was last seen heading this way." Ethan kept his expression calm, though inside his mind was racing. He had not known her last name. He had not known she was the daughter of a man as powerful as Samuel Whitmore. "I haven't seen anyone like that," Ethan said carefully. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "If you do, you'd best let me know. You don't want trouble with Whitmore. He's got money, power, and men who'll do whatever he asks." With that, the sheriff tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Ethan standing in the yard, his heart heavy. When he returned inside, Clara was awake, though weak. She looked at him with fear the moment she saw his face. "He knows, doesn't he?" she whispered. Ethan sat beside her and nodded slightly. "The sheriff's looking for you. He says your father wants you back." Clara shook her head violently, clutching the veil tighter. "No, I can't go back. I'd rather die than return to that house." Her voice broke with desperation. Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to demand answers, to finally understand why she was hiding, why she feared her own father. But another part of him could not bring himself to force her. Still, the pressure was building. The sheriff would not stop searching. The townsfolk would keep whispering. And Ethan's own heart could no longer carry the weight of not knowing the truth. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the cabin filled with the orange glow of firelight, Ethan spoke firmly. "Clara, I've kept your secret. I've protected you. But I can't keep doing this if I don't know what you're running from. I need to understand." Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, whispering again, "Please, don't take the cloth off." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to respect her, but the danger was growing. The sheriff's words rang in his ears. Samuel Whitmore would not rest until his daughter was found, and if Ethan was caught hiding her, he could lose everything: his land, his freedom, maybe even his life. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and touched the edge of her veil. Clara's eyes widened with terror. "No," she cried. "You don't understand, please." But Ethan's patience finally broke. His voice was low but steady. "I can't protect you if I don't know the truth." Before Clara could stop him, Ethan pulled the cloth away. In that instant, the firelight revealed what had been hidden for so long. Clara turned her face away, covering it with her hands, but Ethan had already seen. He froze, his breath caught in his chest. What he saw was not what he had expected: not vanity, not a disguise, not a mask of pride. It was something far deeper, something that struck him to his very core. And in that moment, Ethan's world changed forever. The cloth slipped from Ethan's hand and drifted to the floor like a feather caught in a breeze. Clara gasped, turning her face away, but it was too late. Ethan had already seen. In the glow of the fire, her secret was revealed. Her skin, once hidden, carried deep scars that told the story of fire and pain. The left side of her face was marked with burns, the kind that came not from a small accident but from a blaze fierce enough to destroy everything in its path. Ethan's heart clenched. Not because of the scars themselves, but because of the sorrow he saw in Clara's eyes as she tried to hide. She lifted her hands to cover herself, whispering through tears, "Don't look at me. Please, don't look." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His silence made her tremble. She had expected him to recoil, to turn away in disgust like so many others must have done before. But when Ethan finally moved, it was not to leave her. Instead, he knelt down in front of her, gently taking her hands away from her face. His touch was steady, though his voice was soft. "Clara," he said, looking straight into her tear-filled eyes. "I see you." She shook her head. "No, you see the ruin. You see what's left of me after the fire. This is why I begged you not to take the cloth. I didn't want your kindness to turn into pity or disgust. I couldn't bear it again." Ethan's chest ached at her words. "Is this what you think of yourself? That scars make you less?" Clara's tears fell freely now. "You don't understand. My father Samuel Whitmore couldn't stand to look at me after the fire. He locked me away in my room, away from visitors, away from society. He told me I would shame the family if people saw me like this. To him, I became a secret to be hidden. I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was his shame." Her voice cracked under the weight of those memories. Ethan clenched his fists, anger rising in him. He had heard of Samuel Whitmore, a man of wealth and power, but he had not imagined such cruelty. "What happened?" Ethan asked gently. Clara took a shaky breath. "It was nearly a year ago. The ranch house caught fire one night. No one ever told me how it started. I was trapped inside. By the time they pulled me out, the damage was done. My skin was burned. My face, ruined. My mother wept, but my father, he could not even look at me. He said I would never be seen in public again. He covered me in veils and cloth, told the world I was too ill to leave my room. But the truth was, he wanted me hidden. To him, beauty was everything, and I no longer fit the part of the daughter he was proud to show." She paused, her body trembling as if the memory itself scorched her again. "I couldn't live like that, locked away, treated as if I no longer mattered. So one night, I ran. I rode as far as I could until my horse gave out. I walked for miles, and then I collapsed, until you found me under that tree." Ethan listened in silence, every word carving deeper into his heart. When she finished, she lowered her eyes, waiting for him to pull away from her, waiting for the rejection that always followed once the truth was known. But Ethan did not move. Instead, he reached out, lifting her chin gently so she would meet his gaze. Clara, listen to me. What your father did was wrong. He couldn't see past the scars, but I can. I don't see ruin when I look at you. I see strength. I see someone who survived when others would have given up. I see a woman braver than anyone I've ever met. Clara's breath caught, her lips trembling. You mean that? Ethan nodded. I mean it. I'm not shattered because of your scars, Clara. I'm shattered because of what you've carried alone all this time. Her tears came again, but this time they were mixed with relief. She leaned forward, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her gently. For the first time, she let someone hold her without fear of rejection. The days that followed were different. The cloth no longer returned to her face inside the cabin. She still wore it when she stepped outside, too frightened of the town's cruel whispers, but in Ethan's presence, she began to let the veil fall. Slowly, she grew comfortable sharing pieces of herself she had hidden for so long. One morning, as she helped him prepare breakfast, she smiled faintly and said, "You don't flinch when you look at me. Do you know how rare that is?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. Scars tell stories, Clara. Yours tell me that you've endured more than most. That doesn't make you less, it makes you more. She pressed a hand to her heart, overwhelmed by his words. But peace could not last forever. One evening, the sheriff returned. This time, he did not ride alone. Two of Samuel Whitmore's hired men were with him. They demanded to see inside the cabin. Ethan stood in the doorway, his broad frame blocking their way. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked firmly. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Whitmore is convinced his daughter is here. He won't stop until he gets her back." Behind Ethan, Clara froze. The fear returned to her eyes, and she clutched the edge of the table, trembling. Ethan saw her panic and knew what this meant. If they discovered her, she would be dragged back to the life she had escaped, hidden away again, her voice silenced. Ethan's voice turned cold. "There's no one here who belongs to Whitmore. And even if there was, he's got no right to treat his daughter like property." The sheriff frowned. "Careful, Ethan. You're walking a thin line." But Ethan did not back down. "I'll protect her," he said, his tone steady. "I don't care who comes asking." The men muttered among themselves, but they left for the time being. Still, the warning was clear: Samuel Whitmore would not give up easily. That night, Clara sat by the fire with tears in her eyes. "You don't have to risk everything for me," she whispered. "If you let me go, your life will be simpler. You won't have men coming after you." Ethan shook his head. "Clara, listen to me. You deserve to be free. You deserve to live without hiding behind cloth, without being ashamed of who you are. If I have to stand against the whole world to give you that chance, then that's what I'll do." Her heart swelled at his words. For years, she had known only rejection, only silence. But here, in this cabin with a cowboy who saw her as more than scars, she found hope again. And so, even with danger pressing closer, Clara felt something she had not felt since before the fire. She felt alive. She was no longer only a secret. She was a woman reclaiming her dignity, and she was no longer alone. The night was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Clara sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea, while Ethan paced the small cabin. Samuel Whitmore's threat still lingered like a dark cloud over them. Clara knew that it wouldn't be long before her father's men tried again. The fear she had carried all her life returned, but Ethan's presence made it bearable. "I can't believe he hasn't given up," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes calm but serious. "Men like Whitmore don't easily accept being denied. But we're ready for him this time. You won't be hiding, Clara. Not anymore." Clara's hands shook slightly as she set the cup down. "I'm scared," she admitted. I don't want to go back to being locked away, treated like a thing instead of a person. I thought I could outrun it, but he always finds a way. Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. You won't have to go back. I promise. Whatever comes, we face it together. You're not alone anymore. The first signs of dawn began to creep through the cabin windows. Ethan had spent the night planning every possible way to protect Clara. The firelight from the previous night had shown him her scars, her vulnerability, and he had seen her strength too. He knew that the fight ahead wasn't just for her safety, but for her freedom. When the sound of hooves reached their ears, both of them tensed. It was too early for visitors, and the rhythmic pounding of the horses made Clara's heart race. Ethan moved quickly to the door and peeked outside. Sure enough, Samuel Whitmore had sent more men. This time, a carriage rolled up, carrying the sheriff and two of Whitmore's most loyal henchmen. Clara wanted to hide, to cover herself as she had done for so many years, but Ethan's hand on her shoulder stopped her. You don't hide anymore, he said firmly. Show them who you are. The men dismounted and approached the cabin, their boots crunching on the gravel. Samuel's voice carried across the yard, cold and commanding. Clara. You have no right to run from your family. Clara's pulse quickened. Memories of her childhood, the locked doors, the veils, the whispered words that told her she was less flooded her mind. But this time, she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped forward beside Ethan. I am not a possession, she said clearly, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger. I am Clara Whitmore, and I choose my own life. No one can control me, not even my father. Samuel's face turned red with anger. How dare you speak to me like that, he roared. Ethan stepped forward, his stance protective. She speaks the truth. You've spent years trying to hide her, to control her. That ends now. Clara is free. The tension was thick, but Clara noticed something in the eyes of the sheriff. He seemed uncertain, perhaps realizing for the first time that Whitmore's cruelty had gone too far. The henchmen glanced at one another, uncomfortable under Ethan's unwavering gaze. Clara straightened her back, feeling strength she hadn't known she possessed. I am not afraid anymore, she said, her voice clear and firm. You tried to make me invisible, to make me ashamed. But I survived. I am stronger than you think. And I will not go back to the darkness you kept me in. Whitmore's face twisted in rage, but Ethan moved beside Clara, holding her hand. You're not taking her anywhere, he said. If you try, there will be consequences. And the law is on her side this time. Clara looked around at the group. The henchmen shifted nervously. The sheriff's eyes softened. She realized that the power her father once held over her had vanished. Her courage grew with each passing second. Whitmore's shoulders slumped in defeat, though his pride was wounded. He could not force her back without exposing the cruelty he had hidden for so long. Clara's freedom was now undeniable. That night, after the confrontation, the cabin felt lighter. Clara and Ethan sat together by the fire, the tension from the day slowly fading. She finally allowed herself to remove the remaining cloth that hid her scars. In the firelight, Ethan's gaze held admiration, not pity. You see me, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You really see me. Ethan took her hands gently. I see everything you are, Clara. You're brave, strong, and beautiful. Not despite your scars, but because of them. They tell your story, and I am honored to be part of it. Clara's heart swelled. For the first time, she felt accepted, not as a possession or a shameful secret, but as herself. The past could not touch her anymore. She had survived fire, rejection, and cruelty. And now, she had someone who believed in her completely. In the days that followed, Clara began to live fully. She helped Ethan on the ranch, learning the skills needed to care for horses and cattle. She laughed again, a sound that had been missing from her life for years. The scars on her skin became marks of survival, and she began to embrace them as part of her identity. Ethan remained at her side, supporting her in every step. They rode together across the wide open plains, feeling the wind on their faces and the freedom of a life no longer controlled by fear. The townspeople, once curious or cruel, began to respect her. Stories of her courage spread quietly, and she became a symbol of resilience and strength. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink across the horizon, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sky. "You've changed my life," Clara said softly. "I never thought I could be happy again. I thought the world had rejected me forever." Ethan took her hand and held it close. "You didn't need saving, Clara. You needed someone to remind you of what you already were. Brave. Strong. Unstoppable." Clara smiled through tears, feeling a warmth she had never known. She realized that her scars were no longer a symbol of pain but of triumph. She had faced the fire, the darkness, and her father's cruelty. She had survived it all. And now, she could finally live the life she deserved. As night fell, the stars came out, twinkling above the quiet ranch. Clara leaned against Ethan, feeling safe for the first time in her life. The past had shaped her, but it did not define her. Together, they faced a future full of hope, love, and freedom. No longer a hidden secret, no longer a frightened girl hiding from the world, Clara was herself whole, strong, and unafraid. And in Ethan, she had found not only love but a companion who saw her truly, entirely, and unconditionally. The fire burned low, and the night embraced them. For the first time in many years, Clara slept peacefully, knowing she was free at last. The scars, once a source of shame, were now badges of her courage. And with Ethan by her side, the world felt wide, open, and full of possibilities.